Good morning. Wow, it's a lovely morning here in Seattle. And
overcast per usual.
Yeah, and I feel a little off today just with the 3-hour time difference.
Yeah.
But coffee's your friend. And today we're going to talk about single-page applications with jQuery and AngularJS.
All right, I'm looking forward to it.
Woohoo! This is going to be part of a series that's it's Web Wednesdays. Say that 3 times fast.
Right, Web Wednesdays, Web Wednesdays, Web Wednesdays.
Good job.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
I think Beetlejuice is going to start appearing from the screen or something.
Web Wednesdays!
Well, when I hear Web Wednesdays, I think of that instrument and you hear it at the soccer games all the time, the vuvuzela. It's like, wah, 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 Web Wednesdays.
Beep, beep, beep.
So what do we have coming up on Web Wednesdays?
Well, next week I'm actually back and I'm going to be doing a little bit of an intro to Node.js, which is kind of exciting. I'm a big fan of Node. Have you tried Node?
All right. No, I know about Node.
So you're going to be watching that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the following week, there's going to be mobile web applications. I think that's with Christopher Harrison and Jeremy Foster. Okay. And then there's another introduction to jQuery that's coming up in a couple weeks. So, if you're into web development or design or any of that kind of stuff, or even trying to get your feet wet, this is the perfect series to just, dive right in.
All right, now we're talking my language.
So, this is Dave.
Yes, this is me. Hello, I'm a technical evangelist for Microsoft. I'm based out of Philadelphia, although I am a recent New York transplant where Stacy is currently located. My big focus at the moment is on video games and HTML5. I keep pushing WebGL because I'm telling you it is the future, although we have to get better browser and vendor support at some point. I have I would say weekly podcast, but I kind of took a break for the summer. It's called the Independent Game Developer Podcast, where I interview developers from around the world to kind of find out what they're doing and understand how we can all help out one another. I also blog at davevoyles.azurewebsites.com. You'll find everything there from podcasts that I'm listening to, video games I'm writing about, to tutorials on web and game development. And finally, I try to make myself as easy to find as possible, so you can find me on Twitter at davevoyles. Stacy, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Oh man, I hate intros more than anything, but here we go. I'm a technical evangelist out of New York City, and I focus on HTML and JavaScript. I love anything to do with JavaScript, frameworks, creative coding, all of it. I'm a big fan. I'm also a huge fan of IoT. Been doing a lot of stuff in that space and just hacking on stuff. And I'm also kind of known, I've been here before, talking about design and UX, so you can find me kind of in any of those realms. I tend to interview designers and developers of any sort, doesn't matter, illustrator, someone who's really adept, with web design, to developers on an ongoing series that I have. And I just interview them. I just talk about their process and what they're working on and their perspective on the industry and how things are going. I also talk a lot of marketing, like how to market your app. And I started a new IoT series on Channel 9 I'm very stoked about. And I'm basically going to walk through how to build some really fun little, experiments, if you want to call them that will mash up together a whole bunch of open source technologies and microprocessors and sensors and stuff like that. You can tell I'm really excited about that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And then, as always, I have a blog. You can find me on Twitter. And, anytime you want to reach out, just hit me up on Twitter. It's usually the best place to get me.
Absolutely.
So today we're going to talk about single-page applications. A lot of people call them SPAs.
SPAs. Okay.
SPAs. Acronyms. But it's, I don't know, do you actually call them like an SPA or a SPA?
I always get kind of confused when I start to type because I'll start to write SPA apps and then I'm like, wait a minute, I say apps twice in that sentence, so I don't know, SPAs, yeah, perfect, that works. Yeah,
I don't know. I think today, for the purpose of today, I'm going to focus on saying the entire phrase.
Yeah, I would too.
So we're going to talk about just, going through and the idea of understanding what a single page application is. We're going to try to keep that short. We're going to, I think, if you're here, we're going to assume you kind of have an understanding of how that works, but we just want to point out some kind of commonalities and traditional functionality you'll see in an SPA, some benefits, maybe some drawbacks.
Yep.
Right? And we're going to talk about how do you actually build these things. And so, Dave, you're going to be doing jQuery.
Yes, we're going to build apps 2 different ways. The first time we're going to cover cover how to do it using jQuery. We're going to understand some of the benefits, some of the pitfalls to that. And then when Stacy goes back and actually introduces us to Angular, we're going to see, again, some of the benefits and pitfalls there, and you're kind of choosing what works best for you as a developer in that particular situation.
Yeah, and you know, at the end of this whole entire day that we spend together, you know, we're going to have, once again, it's just a very kind of simple example, but it's going to go through some of the, you know, ideas of what do you need to do, what do you need to consider. And I know when I go into Angular, it's going to be very kind of top level because Angular is a beast.
Yeah, it's a pretty large thing to get into.
Right, so we're going to cover all those things kind of at a high level, and hopefully we can, you know, get back in here and do a full day on Angular and give it kind of the attention that it really deserves because, man, there's so much functionality into that.
Oh, yeah.
And the other thing we're going to cover a little bit is just about Azure. We're going to talk about how do you deploy, right? Right.
How do you actually take this website or this project, this app you've just built, get it onto Azure, but also you're going to cover the services side or the back end of it, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about how do you make a really simple mobile service or a REST API. There's always that moment when you're, especially in web dev, maybe it's not you, maybe someone else is in charge of creating it, but you need real data. You need to be able to hit a REST API, get some data back. Sometimes you need it for testing, sometimes it's production. However you need to use it. We're just going to show you very, very quickly how we've done it, how we've set it up, and so that, you know, you can take that back and say, okay, well, I'm going to start using that. That actually makes sense because it's a lot better than just kind of faking the data, so to speak. At least you're getting it from a real source. You know, you're doing that round trips, that kind of thing. So we're going to cover a little bit about that. So that's kind of our agenda for today, and we kind of hope you you enjoy what we've got covered. So just to kind of set some expectations, target audience, what do you think, Dave?
Well, personally, I'm a front-end developer, so I kind of want to stick towards those, but I know that back-end is equally as important, so we want to cover some of those as well. What do you say? Yeah,
I think, you know, if you have any kind of experience in front-end design or developer, this is good for you. Basic understanding of JavaScript would really help. Or jQuery. A lot of people kind of equate jQuery to JavaScript.
Yeah, it's a common notion.
Right? Like, hey, do you do jQuery? And they don't mention JavaScript anywhere. So
I feel like you have to include it in every project.
Right, exactly. So, you know, those are some of the things we'll cover. But also, if you're kind of more of a back-end person who's maybe, you know, doing a lot of the services or that kind of thing, and you need to understand a little bit more about the front end, this would probably be a really good session for you to just understand.
They can learn how to ping your servers, how to use them, how to draw that content or information to a screen. But also now you have the ability to talk back and forth with those front-end developers you're commonly working with.
Yeah. So just in terms of, you know, MVA, join the community if you haven't. You can get 50 MVA points for this event, and we've got a little code down there. It's actually, I think we need to adjust that one. I've got Power Jump one, but I think it's a new code, so we'll do that on the break. And you can get 50 points for this event.
Okay, when I hear Power Jump, I think of like Super Mario Brothers and like stomping on Goombas and jumping in pipes.
I wish. That would be so much fun.
Well, that's how we can tie in the gaming with the JavaScript parts.
Oh yeah, you're going to learn everything today. Gamification all across the board.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about what is a single page application, you know, and I think that a lot of people kind of throw this around and you know, they think everything these days is a single page application. And, you know, I think we need to just kind of talk a little bit about, you know, what we see as a single page application, what we're kind of, you know, presenting as that context for it. And so, you know, if we're going to look at this, we're going to say, okay, what's a single page application? We're going to kind of look at things like what are some benefits and drawbacks? Because there are benefits and drawbacks to this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Not one size fits all.
Right, and I think that's, you know, that's a common perception is that, you know, hey, you can just do this and it's going to work everywhere.
Oh yeah.
You know, and we're going to maybe take a look at some popular single page applications.
Okay. I think you use many more single page applications than most people realize every day.
Yeah, and the thing is that when we start talking about what kind of makes a single page application, you'll start to see that, like, sometimes sites are a combination. Sometimes a page will have the idea of a single page application within it, but it does have multiple, you know, links and different places you can navigate and that kind of structure. So, you know, you'll start to see kind of where it started and where it's gone to. So what is a single page application? You know, a single page application, web application that fits on a page. I mean, It's the idea that you're not refreshing the page over and over and over again. And it kind of gives you that idea that it's more of a native app experience, because you're kind of used to that idea that it's very performant, it's very fast, it's very responsive, and you're not constantly having to wait for a page to redraw simply because you said, oh, I want to, I'm requesting more information on something. So typically, a single page application can kind of redraw any of the UI without refreshing the page.
Right, so it's kind of just the parts that we need to have updated.
Right. Yeah, so you're not just like pulling down a whole new page, you're just pulling down the information you need and then updating the UI.
Yep.
Right? And, typically with a single page application, they have an initial page render, and a lot of people call this a shell. And this is basically the first initial HTML page that you have that kind of has everything that you need.
Yeah.
And then that acts as your skeleton or your shell that you're going to now start loading in HTML or whatever you need to do on that.
So it's like media, it's images, maybe it's people are typing into a chat queue. Videos, things like that.
Any of those kind of things. I mean, you can think of something, just the example of, sometimes you click, let's say you're shopping, and sometimes you click, see more or give me more results, and automatically appends them to the bottom of the images that you're looking at, doesn't refresh the page. Again, gives you that what a lot of people consider a little bit of a better user experience.
Absolutely.
And so that way you're not kind of worrying about, clicking, waiting for everything to redraw. You can, you see states that are in the nav and that kind of thing. The thing about single page applications is that data typically is separated from the presentation.
Okay.
And so, you have your shell that you kind of load in, and then you go out, you get your data, you bring it back, and however you want to display that data, you now kind of display it now that you have it.
Right.
So data is separated from the presentation typically in these things, and that's why we're often using things like, Ajax to go out and make a call, bring that data back, and then decide what we're going to do with it.
Yeah, you hear like so many different terms and terminology for this kind of thing, right? You'll hear things like MVC, or occasionally you'll hear, or MVVM. Like, how do I take all this and separate the separation of concerns, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that will be a huge part of our discussion today, is separation of concerns, because depending on which approach you take, there's varying levels of separation of concern and decoupling between those things. The other thing that single page apps, they typically have templating. So, you go and you get an image, and the image has a title, and it has maybe a link. That's a template that you use again and again and again.
Right.
So they often have templating. Often, like I said, data is dealt with something like Ajax. Routing. So the idea of, not refreshing the page and appending something through the URL and reading the URL to understand the state of the application. And so routing has been one of those things that have been introduced a little bit more in, I'd say, more advanced frameworks, or more as the frameworks came out.
Okay.
And, it's one of those things that you're starting to see quite a bit, because you don't want to break that experience of the back button, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's a single page app, but it should still feel like it belongs in the Chrome that you're, watching it in or seeing it in or using it in. So that's kind of, in a very high level, what a single page application might be, considered.
Okay.
So benefits and challenges of single-page applications. There are definitely some benefits. There's definitely some challenges. And both of these, depending on what you need to target in terms of browsers, what kind of audience you're going towards, those kind of things. Some of them might not exist anymore for you. But it's still kind of important to bring up some of the benefits and some of the challenges, I think, because, really determining who you're deploying for and browser versions and things like that, that can really factor into how you approach things.
Absolutely.
So some benefits with SBAs is, it gives you that quick experience, right? You're loading in a shell, you're loading in the bare minimum. Sometimes, we see the little loader GIFs. I think there's a gazillion of them now. There's actually sites where you can copy and paste.
Hey, look, it could be worse. It could be like the 90s again, where we have the under construction banners and the little construction guy moving everywhere, or the flaming fire.
I'm okay with those. I like give me those. I like the GIFs like that.
She also actually wanted to use Comic Sans for all this too, and I said absolutely not.
Yeah, okay. Let's just get that straight. That never happened. Liar. But, it gives you that quick experience with smart, kind of smart loading. And so it means that when you're kind of thinking about building an SBA, you got to be thinking about when am I going to get the data? How am I going to get the data? How is it going to be displayed? You tend to load data and views on demand. And that's what makes it quick, is because you're not saying to the user, I think you need all of this stuff.
Right, just throw the kitchen sink at them.
Yeah, like boom, here you go, deal with it. You're basically saying you want that because you clicked something or requested something or did something.
Yep.
And now I'm going to give it to you because you obviously are requesting it.
Right.
Again, it provides a native-like experience in the browser a little bit more. They tend to be a little bit quicker. If you do them right, they can be fairly performant.
That's right.
You know, you can include all the bells and whistles that you might see in a native application in terms of you know, things like animation or like storing to a local database, like local storage, any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you know, also another thing I'm starting to think about as we get further here is if you're in areas where they have really limited amounts of bandwidth, right? This is great because they can save so much. Like you were saying before, they don't have to throw everything at you. Instead, it's just the bits and pieces you need. So this suddenly allows you to hit, you know, exponentially larger number of markets where they may not have broadband access, or they just don't have the time or patience to wait for a lot of these services to return. Yeah,
I mean, and that's the whole thing when it comes down to, you know, that quick experience with smart loading, is that you're basically engaging the user as quick as you possibly can. And you're saying, here's the shell, here's the basics, you know that something's going on, let me configure this for you. Or let me tailor this experience for you. Or however you want, you know, let me load in the initial things. And that way you can kind of start to take into account, you know, those lower bandwidths, those other experiences.
Yeah, definitely.
Mobile, for example, you know, you can just walk around with a mobile phone in New York, okay? You'll get like a very low-end kind of, you know, experience. But once again, everyone has different kind of phones, different kind of connections, different kind of devices, right? So you want to always make sure that you're doing things in the most quickest, performant way you can, so that everyone can have a good experience. Right.
So this way you can still hit that lower-end market, but then you still have these really performant and beautiful apps that also have animations or fallbacks, so they can have really nice performant features.
Yeah. So, you know, some benefits if you're thinking about working with single applications is that, you know, those are obviously some of the things. You're not throwing everything at a user, and you're basically saying, you know, I'm going to make sure this is a quick and good experience for you. Some challenges with single-page applications. And once again, you know, some of these were greater back in the day when, you know, before certain things got added to browsers and browser support across the board. Things like the History API, for example, or things along those lines have really changed this landscape. But, you know, it's important to note, depending on what you're doing, there is SEO considerations you got to have. You know, you got to think about SEO depends on you know, your site being crawled, and so that means the data needs to be in the page. Right? So if your data is not in the page, it's going to have a hard time, you know, crawling and understanding that you have a whole section that's about, you know, books in a bibliography, for example, that might be very useful for your SEO of your site. So there are some SEO considerations. Again, there's a whole bunch of approaches and solutions that have solved that. And back in the day, it was a way bigger consideration than it is now.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe one solution is we can go back to having web rings and things like that again. You know, maybe you can join my web ring, I can join yours. So we can have like a connection of...
You are totally showing your age right now. It's so bad.
So times have changed. You know, I'm talking about having slower connections. I remember the 56K days and web rings and...
Is the ringtone on your phone like the sound of a modem?
Yeah. I wonder how many students or younger folks even know what the sound of that is anymore.
My nephew has no idea, by the way. He doesn't know what a rotary phone is either.
I'm just happy to have a broadband connection now, so this is great.
So, you know, there's SEO considerations to bring it back. There's a, you know, evolution of browsers and browser support. And so, you know, for example, browser history is a big one. You know, push state, replace state. It means you can have like nice, clean URLs that no longer have, you know, the hash bang or however you want to, you know, consider that. And, you know, which also means that, you know, that nice clean URL, you know, it's easier to crawl in that kind of way. And so, you know, you're starting to see the evolution of browsers, and you're starting to see these frameworks that support inherently, you know, the History API with the push and replace. You know, if you don't know what the History API is, it's basically the ability for the browser to, you know, you can push, kind of like a memento pattern, where you push states to it, or you can replace it. So it works with the back button. So you can say, oh, I've just appended the URL. Now, we didn't refresh the page, but I'm putting this on the stack. So if I click the back button, go to the stack. and find out. Go to that memento kind of pattern and find out.
Kind of going backward without losing what we had previously, or having her call back all that information again.
Yeah, it enables, the back button functionality, which inherently requires that page almost to be refreshed so that it can store that information. The other thing about single page apps, and I know this is something that most people are going to be like, whatever.
Of course everyone supports this.
But it requires JavaScript enabled. And yes, 98% of people have JavaScript enabled. I understand that totally. But a big learning experience for me personally as a web developer was disabling JavaScript to kind of understand concerns of like HTML, then JavaScript separation, all those kind of things. And when you disable JavaScript, you start to understand like, whoa, this is just a structure. This is what, SEO sees, for example. This is just what the markup is and all that stuff. So, it does require JavaScript enabled. And yeah, we can assume most people have it.
But at the same time, if you're talking about a corporate environment, often corporations will have security precautions in place for things like this.
Yeah, totally. Like it's something beyond your control where you can't personally go in and change it, for example. And so, that's something to consider, right? And once again, it depends on what you're building. And sometimes you just like, hey, I'm assuming they have this enabled. And if not, I'm going to tell them they need to enable it. And that's fine too. You just got to know ahead of time, your audience, what, kind of what their parameters are, what they're working with, so that you can understand how big of a risk this is for you.
Absolutely.
Like I said, 99%, 98%, I think, have it enabled. Might not be that big of a deal. Potential memory leaks. This is a kind of, I guess this is a personal experience one more than anything else. But, JavaScript, you have to be really careful because you're often going and you're getting data in and then you're adding a view or you're adding, stuff to the DOM and then you're adding listeners to that, items and then you're removing that. You're dynamically updating the DOM and listeners and event handlers. And if you don't manage that stuff carefully and you're not making sure that you're removing all that stuff when you add it, so what you put in must also come out, you run into trouble with a little bit of memory leaks.
Yeah, you start creating garbage everywhere.
So, it's just one of those things you have to consider. Just throwing it out there. So, some challenges with SBAs. So, we're going to kind of just look at maybe deconstructing an SBA or looking at a couple examples or talk about quickly maybe a couple of things or pages you might have seen or visited that are an SBA if you're having a kind of, a problem of thinking of like, oh, what's an example of this? And like I said, SBAs have kind of grown from just being a single page only in that page to, big sites that actually have individual SBAs, maybe working in different sections or that kind of thing. So when it comes to, SBAs, the most classic examples are things like email clients in your browser.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So think of like Outlook.com in the browser and, your mail comes in and you've got like this whole kind of side panel and then you click on something and then it refreshes that. You're not, refreshing the page every time you're doing things.
Right.
Right? And so some of the tenets that we're talking about SBAs is that, okay, it's dynamic data, probably dynamically drawing to the stage, right? You're not navigating far away, all those kind of things. That's, to me, an email client's probably one of the most obvious ones.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's not like the days when you had AOL in the 90s again. You're having to click back, go forward, click back, go forwards to make sure a new email is appearing. This
is just a hark back to like, to years gone by.
Yeah. It could be worse. I could have used Earthlink's email client or something else like that.
So, so I think email clients in the browser is a really good example.
Definitely.
I would say Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you look at Twitter, you go to the website for Twitter and, you log in and you see all these things and then it automatically tells you like, oh, you have, 4 new notifications.
Right.
Or that kind of thing. Twitter's a good example.
Yeah, it doesn't really throw it in your face either because, granted, the Twitter site probably isn't the best tool for viewing your tweets, believe it or not. But it'll tell you, hey, you have more. I know.
Believe it or not?
Yes.
What?
I know. I don't know how people manage to just use Twitter and kind of get by on that. TweetDeck, another example, if you've used that in the browser before. Because essentially TweetDeck, you can have lines and rows of your Twitter columns or lists, and you can view them all dynamically. They're being updated every few seconds, and you can add your own content. You can remove things. So again, Twitter, very, very good example.
The other one I threw in there that we'll be looking at a little bit using more so not looking at it, but using is the Azure portal. And it's the idea of like, once again, you're clicking on something else is showing, it's not necessarily navigating away. You're seeing a little bit of that kind of single page application style in the Azure portal. And then another example I have, which is TuanIT, which is, and there's a bunch of examples out there. We're just kind of giving you some off the top of the head.
Yeah, definitely.
TuanIT is like it's a framework, or it's a platforms for saving your bookmarks. And so
I desperately need something like this.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like kind of got all your bookmark lists on the left, and then you click it, and then you can see things, and they're dynamically loaded.
So it'll actually load the page view for you then.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Right. So you can start to see those single page applications across the board, and they're really one of the things I tend to do, and maybe we can bring up a website and take a look, or that kind of thing. But I'm like a true web developer.
Yeah.
I love like the inspector tools.
That's right.
And I love to go through and just kind of see like,
how are people making this magic?
How are people working? What frameworks are they using? And those kind of things. So don't be afraid if you see a site to kind of go into the inspector tools and like look for libraries that you're very familiar with. Oh, maybe this uses Backbone, or maybe it uses Angular, or I'm sure they've got jQuery in here, or whatever, and start dissecting that kind of stuff a little.
Oh yeah, definitely. A lot of tools we have today, you can unminify code, you can unuglify it, you kind of really peek at what they're doing behind the scenes.
Yeah. So that's a good kind of like start to what we want to talk about, and we're going to show in the next kind of section. Dave's going to kind of go through and start building something very, very simple with jQuery.
Yeah.
So you're going to kind of give an intro to jQuery, very top level.
Yeah. Try not to embarrass myself too much. Hopefully the demo gods are working with us this morning.
And then, we'll kind of just look at like that simple application, how you get data from it. And then I'm going to take his, and my approach is going to be not to go through all the stuff about, let's figure out how you organize stuff and file folder structure and things like that. Mine's going to be like, basically AngularJS from the ground up. I'm going to take what he did. I'm literally going to remove the jQuery, going to remove references to his file, and I'm just going to start from scratch and show you some of the things that AngularJS can do for you or afford for you, and also explain the mind shift between jQuery and AngularJS.
Absolutely.
Because it's a big mind shift, and a lot of people forget that, and they start to mash them together.
Yeah.
And when you kind of, and once again, I'm doing...
You're not really getting the benefits of either side if you're doing that.
Exactly. And what I'm trying to do here is just kind of show you, if you kind of dig around in Angular, I'm showing you so little, like so little.
That's like the top view. We're just sprinkling some.
Just sprinkling, giving you a little bit of joy.
Look at this programmer chef this afternoon.
This is me sprinkling a framework. I really don't think it would look like that. But I'd be like, bam.
Yeah.
But, I'm kind of going to go through that, but I'm going to hopefully show you a couple of little features about it and show you just like almost like a vanilla Angular. Like here's how you start from scratch up to the beginning. So we're going to get started, I think, on jQuery and start looking at that kind of stuff. Oh, well, the other thing we can do is let's look at a single page application.
Go and take a look at some of these pages we're talking about, these sites.
Let me see if I can bring something up in my browser that's...
Which site tickles your fancy this morning?
Well,
I want to see what's going to grab our eye.
The problem I find with some of those things is you need to log in for everything.
I know.
So that's super annoying. But, a prime example for looking at like a single page site would be, should I go to my Twitter? Is this going to be scary?
I was going to suggest Feedly, but I don't know if I want to be looking at the stuff that I look at.
Well...
I feel like nerdy old video games.
Actually,
and
Twitter,
I have a lot of interesting things there.
My Twitter is going to require, sorry, this is a bad example. We're in the Azure portal right now. I could be looking at these kind of things, where if you see these kind of views, it's just toggling views, right? And you can see that all this stuff here, when it goes out to get the data on it, it's basically going to get all of these things that we might have. And so it's just dynamically creating this list. And you notice that all these items right here, they look very much the same. There's really no difference. I mean, the data is different, right? But this is very much what would be templated. And this is the kind of application, if you're looking at something like this, that's very, very much suited towards doing a single page application or using a framework.
Yeah, I'm looking on the left-hand side. It seems like nothing is being changed on the left, right? As you select those new options like mobile services, cloud services, That's staying exactly the same on the left, and you're simply making calls on the right-hand side to draw that new information to the page.
So it's one of those things when you start to look at these things and you're starting to use a framework.
You have the preview there. I don't know if you want to show them the preview or not, but that'll bring you another example of a single page application where all these new things kind of roll out to the side and the right-hand side.
See that animation when you
Look
start?
Look at this fancy, geez.
You fancy.
Yeah, I like this. We got some good front-end web devs over here on the Azure team.
I love the subtle animations. I'm not going to lie, I'm a fan.
Yeah. This is not your grandfather's Microsoft.
Zing! But you start to see these things where quick start.
Boom.
These animations come out. This very much feels like something I might be using on a tablet.
Yeah.
Something I might be, more in terms of like a native application, because I see that it's just moving over states, it's adding information, it's not refreshing the page.
We have these IT pros who can now manage their workforce essentially from a mobile device.
Right, and as we start to go through and we start to look at some of these things, you can start to see that like this is treated as a little module. Everything's built very modular. Everything's up on the page. We've got, in case there's too much content, they've got scroll bars going.
Yep.
Those kind of things. So this is a really good example. Of just that kind of idea of a single page app. Once again, the menu just pops over top, right? You're not like all of a sudden clicking and showing something. You're not really moving around. All this stuff's easy. And the one thing that's also nice to kind of talk about here is that this is allowing me to do my job quicker.
That's right.
In theory, that's what I think a good SBA should do.
Yeah, time is money.
It's efficiency. Right? And so if you can keep everything in one place and people can go click, 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 and they're done, and they've created a mobile service, you've done a beautiful thing.
Yeah, they're not thinking like, what page was I on? How do I get back to here? Where this document's stored?
Breadcrumbs.
Yeah,
click back. You don't have to worry about those kind of things.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the beauty behind looking at some of these single page applications. And, again, they're very, very, it's very quick to load, very performant. It just gets in the data that it needs.
Yep, still has a beautiful flat design.
Well, the design's beautiful, but, our what we're going to be showing doesn't have a beautiful flat design necessarily.
I don't know if I said to each their own, right? Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised when you see what we have.
Okay, Dave.
Okay. Clearly, we can see who's the design individual.
I'm like, okay, Dave. Hold on, let me just change the fonts.
Design is definitely not my strong suit.
So once again, I'm just showing basic examples, but, if you look at Twitter Online's a really great example. It gives you notifications in line, and nothing's updating, those kind of things. And so, just to kind of give you the sense of what those items are, often the other thing you want to look at is the URL too. So a lot of times you'll see, here it's not, necessarily doing that, but a lot of SBAs will kind of just append the URL, and that's how they keep their state.
Yep.
So, if you gave me a link and you said, oh, here, I want you to read this article, it's on this news site, and it's, happens to be a single page app, and you give me the full link, it parses that, and it, kind of initializes the app with that state.
Yes.
Which makes for a great user experience because you don't want to break those links as you send them across, right? So that's kind of the beauty behind that thing.
Well, that's why it's great for both you and the person you're sharing that information with.
Yeah. So, just the idea of a basic kind of single page app. And I think we'll just probably start to hop into the next module and
definitely.
Going with jQuery. Is there anything that you wanted to add in terms of single page apps, Dave? Like anything you want to talk about?
I wish I would have known a lot of this sooner at some of my previous jobs, especially going from some of the jQuery stuff and then over to Angular. It would have saved me a lot of time, a lot of trouble. Something we didn't really cover here that I completely dropped the ball on was debugging. So if I go to make a large and complicated application with jQuery, it becomes extremely difficult to start to debug, to start to add more and more data to it. Because the way we used to do things was we basically append large strings onto the end of everything, or inside the HTML. Made it really, really hard to see what assets am I adding in there, how am I adding them. But with Angular, we can really dynamically load all this information very quickly and peek at all the objects that are going on under the covers over there. Again, I wish I had known about this months or a year ago, because it would have saved me tons and tons of time.
Yeah, I think the one thing to note too is, like, for me personally is, building a single page application. Okay, yeah, that's got approaches and libraries and frameworks and stuff that you can use. But again, like in my past experience, building so many, sites that are mobile friendly, responsive. Might be using a whole bunch of frameworks or anything of that sort. Is understanding that. This is just one part, and what we're giving you is one part of the shell, yep. So to speak, and that it's important to know the right approach, because if you're halfway in and you want to kind of change what you're doing, yeah. It can be a real big pain in the butt.
Yeah,
and so
definitely.
There's so many times where I've started a project and I'm like, I did not need a framework here because it was really simple. Mm-hmm. And again, we're going to talk a little bit about that. And there's so many times where I was like, I wish I had used something and just sucked it up, yeah. And learned. So,
Can you put in your time at the beginning and it pays off in the end? Mm-hmm. Or even, a lot of issues that people tend to have with JavaScript is it doesn't fit in with their mind of the way a language should be, right? You hear a lot of object-oriented programmers coming over to JavaScript and say, oh, this is functional, I don't get it, it doesn't make sense. So in that case, you can use something like TypeScript for type safety. So this way you can really define your types as you're putting them in as parameters. And you can use actually TypeScript with Angular, so you can really get that object-oriented feel and sense of a statically typed language over here. So if you're maybe familiar with Silverlight and C# and you're trying to bring this over, this would be an excellent starting spot to really get off the ground.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if you're a person who's got more of an object-oriented approach, who really likes strict typing, you got to look at TypeScript. There's no doubt. Like that's, we're not going to show it today, right. But it's definitely one of those things that is going to make your life easier. And so don't even start with anything else. Just basically start with TypeScript, which extends JavaScript. It's not like some of the other things you might see in terms of CoffeeScript or things like that.
No.
But it does give you the strict typing. A lot of people really enjoy that. I know personally it's a thing of beauty for me.
Yes.
So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start off with working on a simple little app, and Dave's going to walk us through some jQuery stuff.
Beautiful. Well, until then, we'll see you guys shortly when we return.